And the agenda for tonight, what we're basically going to do is start with the board members kind of talking a little bit about a variety of topics. First of all, how we got here. Grant is going to talk a little bit about how we did get to the decision where we didn't want to move forward with the Gerber building and sort of why we got there, the timeline and how that happened, and how we got to kind of the not feasible on the project aspect. And then Anthony is going to talk about what happened when we went to the CTA with that. What did that conversation look like and what happened there? Lee is going to talk a little bit about outlining our next steps, sort of what we're working on right now to give you guys an idea of what we've been doing since that conversation with the CTA. And then Sophia's going to kind of pick us up at the end with what do we need to do now? What do we need from you and how can you help? And what can we do to together cooperatively as a co-op help this project move forward? So those are kind of the topics that we'll talk through. We'll probably only spend hopefully about 5 per topic, minutes or so, and that way it'll leave a good chunk, pretty much the whole second half, if not a little bit longer, to be able to have some Q&A and some conversation and elaborate in any areas where you feel like you might want to do so. So that's sort of our plan for right now. I see that Lee has also posted the board, or Anthony has posted board@chicagomarket.coop email in the chat, so feel free to capture that for later if you need it. And I think with that, I will now pass off to our first speaker, Grant Kessler. Grant, all yours.
All right, thank you, Dana, and thanks everybody for being here. It's great to see faces, and we're really excited to have you participating. Thanks so much for that. I'm Grant Kessler. I'm your board president. Been involved with Chicago Market since day 2. Hat tip to our founder, Greg Berlowitz, who got this amazing project launched, but I got involved really early. I'm proud to be owner number 3. And as Dana said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the steps, the process, the things that were going on for us after we took possession of the Gerber building. So I'll start there. One of the first things that we knew we needed and our site team needed was to get the building surveyed so we'd have accurate dimensions on the space so that planning for the space could go forward. So we literally didn't have physical drawings at first and had to have solid dimensions measured, and so we hired someone to do that. We worked with 2 grocery consultants and store designer types, one of whom is has experience running co-op grocery stores as a general manager. We worked with our architect team, and we started to develop plans for the store. Multiple iterations happened, and then during that process, we came to kind of a difficult decision that we needed to change our architects. And so kudos to our site team, and actually Dan Miller, shout out to him. He's here in this group, not on my current screen, but I know he's here. He was on our board and leading our site team at the time, and the site team did a fabulous job of sort of navigating this unfortunate situation of having to change architects, find a new one quickly. But we did lose a little time in that process. So it was a little hurdle we faced, but we feel like we handled that fairly well. The iterations continued with the new architect and the design team, and we knew all along it was sort of a challenging location, a challenging site, literally a challenging shape. If you don't know, I mean, it's a wedge-shaped triangle. It's not a square. Your typical grocery store wants to be in a rectangle, and this is not that, which we did know, but it meant that the design iteration process took some time to try to get everything wedged into that wedge. So we worked at that, and in the summer of 2019, last year, we felt we had plans that worked, and we presented them to you and to the CTA. You've probably saw them kicking around in email, and they're up on our website. So we had store design plans that we felt were working. What that allowed us to do was the next step, which is to take those plans to out for some preliminary construction and equipment bids, right? So we had guesstimates in the past about what it was going to cost to build the store and what the equipment would cost. But now we had for almost final plans, or plans that were final enough to start getting those quotes. And we did exactly that. And we got some numbers back on both construction and on the equipment. Remember, Gerber is a completely empty space. There's, that's a pro and con for us. It's exciting to design it the way we want, but it means that we have to put everything in there. Literally no running water, no HVAC, there's nothing there. And so those quotes for the equipment and the construction came back high and challenged our business planning, our financial projections in our pro forma. So we took a step back from that and said, okay, let's redraw the plans to remove what we previously had, which was pretty extensive use of the basement. And that was adding to our costs, we felt. So we thought, well, let's try to figure out how to redesign and only be on the first floor. Use the basement a tiny bit, but not as elaborately as we were planning. So that second set of design drawings let us kind of get a next round of estimates on our equipment and our construction. They were lower, but they were still high. So those are still challenging numbers. It's an expensive project to build out. At about the same time that summer, our second phase of our owner loan campaign was winding up, right? So as you probably remember, if you were owner and around at the time, we ran two dynamic and busy and hard worked campaigns to raise the funds for the store. Co-op is partly funded by its owners, and we needed to find that funding in our owner base as owner loans. And so those two campaigns found us hitting 1/3 of our mark, if you recall. And so at the same time that we were coming up short on funding, the cost side of our equation was coming in high. And so we were challenged on a couple of fronts in terms of moving forward with the pricing of the thing. The next thing that happened is late fall, we welcomed a bunch of new board members to the organization, which was awesome. In August and September, we spent time, well, in August we elected them, thanks to you all for voting. And in September and part of October, we spent time onboarding those folks and sort of getting up to speed with a lot of new people. That was really exciting. It was great to have them. But then by late fall, what we started to learn with our grocery consultant was that, again, numbers weren't working, the labor costs were high, the equipment and construction costs were high, and she felt like she wanted a second set of eyes from another set of consultants to look at this. And so we quick scheduled with them. The soonest they could join us was mid-January, and we had this organization, National Cooperative Grocers. They are a co-op of consultants who help grocery stores get open like ours. So we had folks come visit us in January. They spent the full day with us. They looked over our design plans. They looked at the space. They met with us extensively. And the simple answer to all of their findings were that the site and the construction and the labor costs there were just too high for us. It was too expensive for us, a community co-op, to open a grocery store like that. That was, of course, super tough news to hear. None of us were thrilled with that, but it was coming from professionals who know how to run grocery stores. So the board sat down and looked at that information from them and assessed our project in 3 areas. One, what that group was looking at, which we call operational feasibility, the ability to put a working store in that space. So the operational side of things. The board looked at that operational side. We looked at the funding feasibility. Can we, in fact, raise the money that is needed to build a store in this location? And thirdly, we looked at organizational capacity. By then, our board was shrinking. We are, at the moment, down to 6, but at the time we were having this discussion, we were at 9, and we're normally 15 when we're full. And we felt like we were flagging in terms of having the working manpower and the volunteers pushing hard and pushing forward to make this project work. So the board looked at those 3 areas and felt uncomfortable moving the project forward in that space, to be perfectly honest. So on behalf of owners, we did what a board is supposed to do, exercised the fiduciary responsibility of weighing all these facts, and decided that the project, as we understood it at that time, was not feasible at the Gerber Building. Too costly, too risky, funding was very weak for it, and our outside consultants were sort of thumbs down on the operational side of it, right? Again, coming to this conclusion was very difficult. We all know everybody wants to be in that space. We do too, but we felt we have to make a logical decision and a strong, firm business decision that'll get an open co-op that can last. So we voted to go talk to the CTA and ask to be let out of the lease. We checked in with our aldermen, and we checked in with our folks at the Uptown Chamber, who both have been extremely supportive of us through the whole process. And even when we told them this bad news, they were supportive of us and continue to be. So they've been awesome and super backing of us. We still have their full support. And this brings me to what happened when we go to see the CTA. And for that, I turn it over to fellow board member Anthony, who will tell you about that next step.
Hi, so I'm Anthony. I am, I think Grant said he was owner number 3. I think I'm owner number 26. So something close to that. I run Chicago Market's legal team. That's what I do in my day job. I'm an attorney. And so I jumped in on these negotiations. Obviously, I was not involved. I was involved tangentially in the original negotiations with CTA over the lease. I reviewed the lease, but I was not in this role at that time. So when the board voted to say, okay, we want to pull out, we consulted with our outside counsel. We have volunteer counsel who are very good, and they gave us some strategic tips on how to approach the CTA. And we did. We went to the CTA, and we went to our CTA's real estate broker, which is JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle. And Lee, Grant, and I went to a meeting with CTA. Now, it's important to note that CTA and JLL did not know when we went to this meeting exactly what the meeting was planned to be about. And the reason I bring that up is not just to be funny, but to say that the one reason is because there is another issue with the building. And that is that there's some serious environmental issues that need to be remediated. As you might imagine from an old building, there's some water problems in the basement. There's all sorts of issues that causes that have, in fact, multiplied over time. We were under the impression when we signed the lease that we were getting a vanilla box, a completely built out space. And if you've been in the space, on the first floor, we basically did. But in the basement, not so much. And there's quite a bit of water damage. There's mold problems. There's potentially, we don't know, some minor structural issues. And we've been going back and forth with CTA for about a year over who was going to pay for that. It was clear to us under the terms of the lease that they should pay for it. The real question is who would front the money and when. And that was a factor that played into our feasibility discussion when we were discussing the decision to leave the project. And so that was, to be frank, the reason, or I should say the pretext for the meeting. And we went in and we discussed it with them. And I will say on behalf of Lee and Grant, and I think I can say this without exaggerating, that we were shocked by their response. We intended to go into the meeting and say, sorry guys, we're done. Between the environmental and the uncertainty with paying for it and these new feasibility problems, we just don't think this is a viable project. Let's figure out a way out that makes everybody happy. You know, is it a termination fee? Is it a loss of security deposit? Whatever it would be. And they, you know, were shocked because they didn't know this was coming, but also were incredibly accommodating and made it very clear from the first moment that their number one priority was making this project happen if they could possibly do it. And that they were willing to make fairly, frankly, enormous concessions or changes. I shouldn't say concessions because this is, I don't think at this point, particularly adversarial. They were willing to make enormous changes to the lease, to the structure, to the timeline, to all sorts of things in order to try to make this happen. And so the meeting, the original meeting, was basically sort of a wash in the sense that we obviously didn't walk out of there with a finished proposal. We went in thinking we were terminating our lease, and we left thinking, we should probably go back to the board and discuss this again. Because some of the objects they proposed, not that they signed anything on, but they proposed were material to the points that Grant raised earlier, to the issues that may or may not make this project feasible. When we presented all these proposals to the CTA and had another call with them, the answers were amazingly positive. You know, I'm not going to go into excruciating detail because technically these negotiations are ongoing and we want to keep them somewhat confidential. I'm giving you a lot of detail. But the overarching emphasis was that they were willing to do almost anything they could do within the bounds of legality. And the CTA is not permitted to give us $1 million grant. You know, they're not a grant agency, but they were going to do almost anything they could do within the bounds of their powers to try to make this project happen, be it time, be it minor changes to the building, be it changes to the lease. And that really caused us to reevaluate our stance. Not because we had decided that it was feasible, that's part of what this discussion is about, but because we had decided that the terms, the material terms under which we had made the decision to leave the lease had changed, and potentially had changed fairly dramatically in a good way for Chicago Market. And the last thing I'll say about this before I turn it over to my next board member is that one of the things I encourage all of you to do during the question and answer session and during the rest of this meeting is to think about things that could be asked for. You know, one of the things we're doing right now is we're going back to CTA to renegotiate that lease with their support. And that's why I say it's not particularly adversarial, it's really collaborative. And there's been some things that we have put forward that we have discovered either from our 2-year process since the lease signing or from our consultants that they have just agreed to. So for instance, redesigning some of the streetscaping to make it easier for patrons to access the store via sidewalk, or as I said, the parking lot, things like that, that they are absolutely willing to do and are relatively easy to fix. You know, once again, those are not writing us large checks. That's not within their power to do. But there's creative things that they can do that we can write into the agreement that they are willing to do to help us. So that's sort of the status of the negotiations. Right now, just so you know where we are exactly right now, we're at a place right now where we have sent our proposal to CTA. They have sent a counter proposal back, frankly, accepting most things, and the things they pushed back on weren't really pushback so much as alternative suggestions. Also, just so you know, in case anyone has questions about this, in terms of, some of you may know our rent commencement date was actually, please tell me it's not tomorrow. No, 2 days from now. Our rent's commencement date is Saturday. That's not a thing anymore. Both because of the ongoing negotiations and because of the COVID crisis, that they have agreed without controversy to simply defer it until we finish these negotiations. So Chicago Market is not expending money on rent for this site while we're in this process. And so where we are right now legally is either we are going to sign a new, fairly dramatically amended lease with CTA that helps us with some of these issues, and Lee and Sophia are going to talk a little bit more about this, we're still going to decide to walk away at some cost, but that's after we've done a lot of feasibility analysis. So I'm going to turn it over to Lee for a discussion of what our next steps are, given this landscape of negotiation with the CTA that has changed our perspective somewhat from that original vote.
Hi, I'm Lee Herman. I'm Secretary Treasurer on the board. I am not quite an original startup owner, but I've been an owner for several years now, and in my 3rd year on the board. As you heard from Anthony, the CTA is working hard to give us the additional time that we need to build out the store. I want to talk about, okay, now that we have a little more time, what do we need to do to decide that we really can get this store open? And we have to be clear that the project will work and is feasible in 3 areas. Operations, and that's already been talked about a little bit. So we have to find ways to reduce the operational labor costs, and appreciate the suggestion of people volunteering, but unfortunately that's not a choice. The good side of that is part of what we want to accomplish with having the store is being able to offer jobs for people. So we're planning to work with co-op consultants to look for a different way to open the store initially with less of a store program and a sustainable labor footprint to get ourselves open. Organizational capacity, we are a working board, and so number of board members is kind of a big deal because that's more people to row the boat. We're also revitalizing the volunteer team, and I'm happy to announce Kate Grimm, who's on the call as our new volunteer coordinator. She's just getting her feet under, but already starting to dig in. So we're revitalizing the volunteer team to get the people to do help with fundraising and all of the various administrative things we need to do to keep the co-op going as we're growing new owners and going after fundraising. And funding, finally. We think that there's at least another $1 million to build out and get the store open. Obviously, part of what our revised take at the store program will be will inform what construction costs are, and we expect to bring those down. But there's still a bunch of money needed to go from what Grant described as basically an open space to a working grocery store. Whatever that ends up looking like, which is part of what our operational feasibility study is going to have to look at is what does a grocery look like these days? So we'll get professional help to get the feasibility of operations answered. The other place that we're going to need to look at for financial and organizational feasibility, those are really up to us as a co-op. Obviously, even if we solve those, if we and the co-op consultants can't find a way to make the store work, it's not free for us to leave. We'll likely owe CTA termination fee, and we have to start over with design, maybe not 100% from scratch, but a good chunk of the way from scratch, since we'd have a different building, and we'd have to go find a different building. We're optimistic about finding a way to make it work operationally. We had a very full-featured program before, and we think that will mean a simpler store program to get open initially, and then we can get fancier as we go along and as the store is successful and financially able to support them. So finance is a big deal, and getting the funding is a key piece. So I'm going to turn it over to Sophia to talk about what we need to do next.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophia and I'm owner number 55. Been on the board for almost 3 years now, and you might remember me from the owner loan campaign. So in talking about what we're looking for from our owners, if you attended our owner meeting in the summer, or if you attended our OLC events last year, you'll recognize some of these sentiments because what we need hasn't changed so much, but the gravity of the need really has. So as has been iterated many times already, the project won't happen unless we get funding. So we've already had 2 campaigns. We've hired a capital campaign consultant. We've reached out to a broad range of organizations and of course our owners. But what changes this time is that we actually are able to accept donations. And it might sound kind of funny, like, oh, didn't you know you could accept donations before? That's not quite the case. First of all, donations were not a commonly practiced capital campaign mechanism in the co-op space before. It's becoming more popular right now, and it opens up a lot of pathways. So that's a path that we can go down now, and that opens up the opportunity for owners to let us know what organizations you have connections with, or what individuals that you know that you can connect us with that are open to, or that would be interested in donating. Also, we have been working with consultants to lower the overall project cost, so that helps with some of the financial feasibility aspects that Lee and Grant mentioned earlier. But that alone is not going to solve our problem. We really need creative solutions. Creative solutions that Anthony had mentioned, as far as really thinking thinking out of the box about our triangle, but also creative solutions for how to fundraise, and ideas about how to use the space in the meantime. So going back to the fundraising piece, who can you connect us to? Individuals, organizations, grants. We heard from another one of our co-ops in a different part of the country that currently has applied, or currently is working with 6 grants in order to open up their store. So we as a board have access to a national brain trust of co-ops that have opened, that are in the process of opening, that are meeting similar challenges that we do. So of course we have those resources, but it's the rest of our owners that can really help us connect to those creative solutions that we may not have thought of. We're all as individuals thinking about what we can do, but this really is a community effort. And that's how we're going to get across the line, is with all of your ideas and out of the box thinking. Of course, in addition to financing, we also need your time and your skills. So we've already talked about the board. We need people to run for the board this summer. Of course, volunteer in the process, touch base if you're interested, come to our board meetings. That was mentioned in the chat as well. But that's a great way to get a sense for how what our board dynamic is like, and where you might even point out weaknesses that you are eager to fill in on. So please do join our board meetings. If you have time, but you don't quite know how to apply yourself, you haven't really seen anything in our communications that speaks to you, please reach out to us. We are, as Lee mentioned, we've got a volunteer coordinator, and we have a roster of ways to get involved. So just raise your hand, even if you don't have a way to volunteer, because we have a wide range of volunteer needs. Of course, if you have a skill set that you'd like to offer, please let us know about that as well. The skill set that was mentioned in the question in the chat about what skills the board is looking for, those are also skills we're looking for in our volunteers. So please do reach out to us with, like I said, with your time, with your skills. When the time for our owner loan campaign comes, please consider investing in Chicago Market as well. And if you can't personally invest or donate, please think about your friends, your colleagues, and what organizations you have your relationships with that you can connect us to.
And what we wanted to do next is really kind of like start addressing some of the questions that we've seen coming into the chat and some of the information. One of the things that was initially brought up, going way back in our chat, was why did we even pick the Gerber building to begin with? And so I'll take a stab at answering that just to kind of get us kicked off with Q&A stuff. We were looking for a specific set of criteria when we were looking originally for a location and a building. One of them was size. We wanted to have a grocery store that was big enough in size that it could actually make a dent in the local food system. And if you remember sort of what a lot of our vision and mission and all of those values are that we hold, we were looking for something that was local and really would affect the local economy, the local food system, assist the local farmers and local producers. So we wanted something that could allow us to be big enough that we would have enough of an impact when it came to those sorts of things. We also wanted to make sure it was a place that had parking. That was one of the things. And we also still wanted it to be transit friendly. And how more transit friendly can you be than on multiple train and bus lines with divvy stations and all these other things, and within walking distance of a lot of people in a neighborhood that could easily access a grocery store for food. So we wanted to look at a lot of those different things. One of the things that we absolutely loved about the Gerber building was its history and its uniqueness and its character, and the character of Uptown and the neighborhood and how beautiful and diverse it is. That quirkiness of the building does work against us, as Grant sort of said. We would have probably fared much better if we had looked for a perfectly square building. But co-ops are also unique in the way they're designed. We're only going to be the second one in the city of Chicago when we open our store. So it's one of those things that you just have to find the pros and cons and balance out the challenges with other ways that you can design things. So that's one of the things. We were looking for a place that was transit friendly, but still had parking. We were looking for a place that had a decent size. We didn't want to start like 300 square feet and then really have to spend time doing capital campaigns over the next several years in order to be able to find another site and expand. That's what most co-ops do. We kind of wanted to start big to begin with. Now we're having to relook a little bit at that programming and narrowing it down, still in a large enough space, but focused on things that we know we can achieve and actually get paid for and built, and then go from there to like add on. But then we'll have the space to be able to like expand and add on within the environment that we have. So hopefully that answers some of the question that you had related to I think it was Matthew Nix, related to why did we pick the Gerber Building, or what were we looking for, and some of that criteria. I know donations has been kind of like a hot topic in the chat, so I'm wondering if either Sophia or Grant, could one of you speak to this donation mechanism that we have now, and like how it works, and why now, and what are the components of it, and tell us a little bit more about that?
Shall I take that one, Sophia? Or do you want in? Okay. Donations. So it is true that in our last rounds of campaigning, we were sort of advised not to lean heavily on the idea of donations in favor of having owners make loans. But we're learning that model may not be the best choice for an urban environment. And so we are watching the Oshkosh Food Co-op in Wisconsin, for example, just now in March, finished their capital campaign and raised over $1.6 million. And about 50% of that came from donations rather than loans. And so they made it work. They messaged, our concern in the beginning was messaging two things at once. Oshkosh has proven it can be done. They offered both to folks, and frankly, the donations option can let people in at lower dollar amounts, but it can also let people in who aren't even owners. For owner loans, you have to be an owner. So there are some advantages to that, and having both mechanisms. And we've come to learn that, hey, we're up against a massive fundraising challenge. We need to throw everything at this. And so clearly we need to make greater use of the donate option. We had the donate option in place before, we just didn't talk about it a lot. The way donations work is we being a for-profit business legally in the state of Illinois, it is true that you cannot donate directly to us and call that tax deductible. However, we have two ways of taking donations. One, you can just make a straight donation and we'll get 100% of it. The other option is you can make a donation through this, what's called the CDS fund, and it's listed on that page on the website. That fund is a nonprofit set up to do exactly that, take funds from people who want to donate to a specific co-op. And then their mission is to support that co-op, so they are able to then grant us those funds. They take a percentage, so there's some loss in there, but we don't pay anything for it. We just get less than the person donated. But the donor has a nonprofit, a tax deductible donation at the end of the year. So we're happy to work with that model. We'll be using it more, and that's how it works and why it's legal and usable for us, and sort of why we were a little quieter on it last time, but that's got to change for us.
And I know we had kind of mentioned Grant had talked about Oshkosh and watching them, and Sophia had mentioned, we've got this brain trust of all of these co-ops around the country, and it's been actually quite amazing to talk to the other startups and find out what's going on in other places where they're trying to do exactly what we're doing. We have peer calls typically every month, but interestingly enough, with the COVID happening, we have actually had an uptick of a lot of co-ops wanting to talk about what's going on. And I know one of the questions that came through from someone in the chat was, with the current economic situation and with things going on right now, what's happening? And there's a series that FCI, the Food Co-op Initiative, has put together called Co-Video series, and it's all Zoom chats, video chats about what's going on, and they're bringing a variety of different grocery consultants and specifically co-op consultants into these video calls on a host of topics. What does owner growth look like, and trying to get people to join as owners when there's a pandemic going on? How do you do owner interest meetings and things that we used to do like in the libraries and things like that? Grant actually attended one today about what's happening in the grocery industry and what's going on in operating co-ops right now and how are they handling things. One of the things we talked a lot about in our store is having bulk foods. And we were talking about, what does COVID mean with bulk foods now? Like, how does the whole hygiene and sanitation and stuff take a different perspective? Because we still want to minimize our packaging and we still want to have sustainable values and things like that. But what is it going to look like? So we're actually starting to listen and look at lots of other experts in the field and in the industry that are getting information from a lot of trend reports and research reports. I just posted for the board 6 different reports from Acosta, which is a market industry, grocery market industry research and marketing firm that does tons and tons of trend research. One of the things that they called out, which I found fascinating, was that people are starting to, and I say people, I don't say us co-op people because we're already probably there, but the greater public is starting to buy into the idea of local food and reaching out to local producers and local farmers and getting your food from closer nearby. And I think as we see things like the meat concerns happening with the mass agriculture and stuff like that, we're seeing some perceptions change. So we're going to come out of this whole pandemic with a very different way that we shop, a very different way that we approach the food system. And we need to be listening really closely to everything that's going on in the discussions that are happening among co-ops, among conventional grocers, among the, the food industry as a larger entity, to really understand where we're going to end up and what we need to do. We played around with the ideas of having a pickup or a drop-off kind of like, area in the store. Previously, we've, talked, wouldn't it be neat to be able to order online and pick up in store and that kind of things? Isn't that something that we should be considering with all the technology happening? Well, now today, after COVID stuff is going on and that's sort of like the norm, that's where we're seeing trends happen. So we're going to have to look as we begin to do some of this operational feasibility. Maybe we need to look at what are those trends that are coming out of this state that the world is in right now, and what's happening here locally within our food system and the shoppers in Chicago and what they're doing and their attitude, to try and get a better sense of what our program needs to be. We've got pros and cons. We have to sort of change things up a lot, but we have this huge opportunity with this reset that we're sort of taking at the Gerber Building to stop and go, what do we need to change? Okay, if I had done this, 6 months ago, it would have been a very different feasibility study and operational design that we might have come up with. We're doing it now where we have this future view, and as uncertain as it is, there are still some trends and some patterns that are coming out of it that hopefully we'll be able to implement. So I hope that answers some of that question, but I'm seeing the chat kind of go crazy here. So Lee, you've been following along. Are there other questions that we should bring up and try and answer?
I think Grant kind of answered it in the chat. There was some kind of, what does the grocery business look like, and are we getting input about that from co-ops? And I think Grant mentioned that NCG and Colluminate are doing surveys toward that. So unless Grant, you have something to add to that, and that one's probably covered.
I know there was some questions in there about the volunteering in the store and labor costs, that being a potential way to address labor costs. What we're also realizing as we talk to some of the consultants, just to kind of touch on that question a little bit more, is, for example, we wanted a full service butcher shop within the store, and we wanted to have all of that. The labor costs to be able to have people with a skill set paid at the way we would want to pay people, which is living wages, benefits, things like that, to have that kind of labor force would be really expensive. So we're having to say to ourselves, well, can we have still a lot of local meat carried in our store, even if we're not the ones that are actually cutting to order and variety of things like that? What does that look like? Another thing that we've been struggling with a little bit with our program and labor costs and layout is the layout of the store. We had mentioned, Grant talked a little bit about the wedge shape and that sort of thing, but we also wanted to have an entranceway leading out into the parking area. And then we also have that beautiful entrance right at the corner of Wilson and Broadway. Having 2 different cash wraps and 2 different doors that need to be manned and that sort of thing doubles the cost of the cashier labor force on the front end, as they call it in the grocery store. So we're looking at, is there, would it be okay, would our would our owners, we should ask you this question, feel free to answer it in the chat if you have an opinion. Would they be willing to walk around the building from the parking lots to come in the Broadway Wilson entrance, knowing that they can take a cart all the way around out, you know, back to their car? Is that feasible for us to do something like that? How can we narrow it down? Do we pick a different door altogether? Do we break through and build a different door somewhere else where it's more centrally located between pedestrian traffic and the parking lot? So we're looking at a lot of things like that in our layout of our store and in the design and in the programming to try and come up with what are other ways that we can address the needs of bringing that operational cost down. All righty. So current, go ahead, Lee. Did you have something you wanted to introduce?
Yeah, so Sarah asked, even with an amended lease, are we still trying to fit a square peg in a round hole? And at what point do we cut our losses and move out? So that's really the point of our operational assessment with the co-op consultants, is to see if we can come up with a model that really does work in the space and will produce, is buildable at a reasonable enough cost and that is feasible to operate and will generate enough revenue to become profitable.
And so to answer the point real specifically, at what point do we, you know, say we got to just pull out and cut our losses? We don't feel like we're at that point yet. We need to make a concerted effort to redesign, address our fundraising and all of that. We could have the most amazing design within the Gerber building and it could actually answer all of our operational concerns. But if we don't have the fundraising, if we don't have the money to build it, if we don't have the support from the owners and people engaged in wanting to join the board and do the work as volunteers or wherever else, we're still going to have to come to a decision of, can the project move forward, right? Is it feasible to do that? So it's not just the operational side. It's really all three of those buckets that Lee had talked about earlier. Okay, other questions that are coming in. I'm going to scroll back a little bit and see if I've missed a few of them. Somebody, Matt Nix, was asking about what do our current financials look like? Amount raised, amount spent on consultants' fees, etc. Who would like to take that one? Lee, I know you're treasurer, but you're also kind of manning the chat for us. Grant, did you want to take that one?
The question of, sorry, repeat for me because I was busy typing and reading a chat.
Oh, sorry. Current financials, where are we at? How much have we raised? What is it looking like money-wise for us?
Thank you, yes. So what we've raised in terms of the capital campaign, our goal was 1.8 million and we raised 600,000. So that's the owner loan fundraising status. We have 1,846 owners, and what we do with that number in part is multiply it times the dollar value of becoming an owner, $250 or $500, and that comes to a number that lands in our financial planning. That is also part of how we fund the store, right? So the dollar amount of those funds count as well, and that totals our goal at 2,000 owners at bare minimum before we open. That equals $575,000. So there's $500,000-ish in owner equity as well. So we pool that with owner loan funds, and that's supposed to be our participation that the bank loans against. We use owner equity, those purchases that owners make over the years, to move the project forward up to this point. We've been, as we mentioned earlier, we're a lot of volunteers, but we also, in this past year and a half, 2 years, had to hire consultants. We're hiring an architecture firm. We're hiring consultants to design and plan the store and that sort of thing. And those things do cost money. So the majority of our operating capital from owners has been spent. We have had to use a little bit. We've been very careful, and we separate the owner loan funds in a separate bank account, and we've made every attempt not to use them, but we used some to fund our owner loan campaign, for example, the second phase of that, and so we've had to dip into that funding a little bit too. So the truth on what is our financial status is funds are very tight, to be perfectly honest. So that's where we are financially. And
I think part of some of the questions that I saw come in, I saw it flow through about the $250 owner share. And one of the things that the board has pretty much ready to go, we just haven't felt that it was quite the right time to pull the trigger on it, especially if there was a potential of us moving out of Gerber, was the idea of an owner share that is for people who are economically challenged, and it would be very minimal to actually join as an owner. And there are a lot of different co-ops that we looked at, probably I think 12 different co-ops that have a variety of these sorts of methods of joining a co-op, and some of them were hoop jumping, and you have to be on government subsistence and you have to fill out all these forms and prove this and prove that, and other people are just like, your word is okay with us, we'll just like give you ownership for a really minimal amount. And so we've kind of taken a balance between a lot of the things and took the best of all the worlds that we could find to formulate a ownership share option for, we haven't come up with a name for it yet, but lower income, economically challenged, whatever term you want to use around that. And we pretty much do have that kind of ready to go, but we definitely want to have some marketing around it. We definitely want to make sure that it gets out to the people in our community that could really benefit from it. And frankly, being an owner does have additional responsibilities, such as volunteering and engagement and that sort of thing. There's financial, which is one of the cooperative principles, is financial participation. We don't want to make the owner fee to join, or the share equity, to be limiting for people. And frankly, if they're going to participate, and we would love to have more diversity on the board and more people with different viewpoints than that are represented on the board and as a volunteer base. So having this kind of an option would be really, really helpful and critical for that. So we are looking at still trying to roll that out as soon as, again, as a board, our bandwidth opens up enough that we can focus on some of those other things that we would like to do. All right, so looking for other questions that we haven't addressed or answered. Lee, do you have anything that stands out specifically as I scroll through?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything in chat so far.
I know folks have been answering in the chat as well, so thank you for that.
One thing I want to emphasize, sorry, Dana.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because this has been brought up by a couple different people, is the cost of departure. So one of the things I want to emphasize as part of our negotiations with the CTA, there is a cost to departure. This is not a simple decision of we leave and walk away versus we stay at the Gerber building and continue investing money. We signed a lease with the Gerber building, and that's the plain truth from a legal perspective, is we did sign a lease, and the CTA is willing to be unbelievably flexible. The CTA is not willing to let us out of that lease with no cost. And anyone who has any experience with leases can understand that. And so it's worth noting that it's a balancing act between all the things we're discussing today, the possibility of making the project feasible, financing, labor, capacity, all those things, versus a fairly hefty cost. Probably, debatably not an organization destroying cost, not millions of dollars, obviously, but a big enough cost that in addition to the cost we've already spent on things like design, I think there's a reasonable discussion of whether, if we can make the project work even at a slightly lower level in terms of programs, given both a very accommodating landlord avoiding those costs and the prominence of the site, I think all of us would love to make it work if possible. But all the things discussed on this call are making it possible or not. But I do want to emphasize, it's not a simple binary. It's not yes or no, walk away versus, sorry, my cat is very loud. Walk away versus build. There is a cost to departure, and that cost is substantial. And so we want to do our best, especially given CTA's concessions, to make it work if we can, but also we don't want to jump into a project that is not feasible.
Thanks for adding that, Anthony. I was trying to scroll through the chat to look at some other things. I know the topic of bringing in unpaid interns or some things like that also came up. One of the things that we also agreed to fairly early on was making sure that we're partners with a lot of the organizations in the community. And when we looked at some of the organizations in the community, there are plenty of people that are doing job training, that are doing a wide variety of things like food preparation or stuff like that, that might actually, we might be able to bring in some labor in that way that would be supporting these organizations, giving job experience and opportunities to people, whether that turns into then a full-time job with like all of the bells and whistles. That could certainly be something that we could look at. I'm probably the one person on the board that has a little bit of the HR background. So when it comes to recruitment and things like that, typically there are ranges of pay based on how experienced someone is and what kind of skill set they bring into an environment. So also being able to give people first-time job opportunities might lower our labor costs a little bit. But again, we don't want to have a huge disparity in the pay ranges that we offer in our store too. And you have to sometimes make sure you're balancing the environment and making it a good working environment for everybody, and that there's this sense of fairness, and that can be a very difficult conversation sometimes when it comes to pay amounts and skill sets and how do you justify different things. So that's something that we have to kind of tiptoe around a little bit and be very, very conscientious about how we do it, and make sure that we're being very ethical and true to what we want to be as a co-op, which is community-based and very, very inclusive. So things that we certainly want to look at and talk about, but wanted to kind of toss that in from sort of the HR side of things. Anything else you guys have noticed coming up in the chat specifically? We still have about like 15, 20 minutes left, and it seems like there's a lot of great conversation kind of happening in the chat. So one of the things I think I'll do, as long as everybody's like cool and okay with it, is I'm gonna go ahead and unmute everyone. What this does is give you the opportunity to turn on your microphone. I think you still have to do that particular one. And if you have a secondary screen or something of that sort, you might have an echo. So we just have to watch for that as well.
Hey,
But
Dana.
everybody off mute. So,
Hey, Dana.
Yeah.
Let's not do it that way. Let's mute everybody and then let them unmute, and then we won't have so much noise. I'll do it.
I did the unmute all, but I think that was just so that they have the option to remute.
No, there's a separate option. Let me do
Oh,
it.
got it. So, as long as you as the for you guys to be able
So
to
while people are talking
unmute.
about tech,
Yeah, so people can now unmute themselves to talk.
Perfect.
right, my cat is hilarious, James, thank you. While people are talking about tech, I will raise one issue. I've seen a lot of this in the chat, so I do want to talk about this from a legal perspective, which is a lot of people have talked about the various labor possibilities. It's absolutely correct that labor is a major issue for us in terms of funding. It absolutely is. I just threw a towel at my cat, by the way. Labor is absolutely a major issue in terms of our pro forma planning. But one thing we do have to keep in mind is that we can't rely on unpaid labor. I think this is a very common thing that co-ops have talked about throughout the history of co-ops back into the 70s. And it's really important to know that this seems like a really interesting idea. And this, by the way, this is not meant to shut down creativity, because I've actually, even in the chat today, seen creative ideas that are possibly useful, including one we might talk to CTA about. But the labor issue is probably not one. And the reason for that is that it's pretty much illegal under federal law to accept volunteer wage labor. And frankly, co-ops get dinged on this. This is a thing co-ops actually have gotten in trouble for, because it used to be a very big part of the co-op model back in the 60s and 70s, that there would be great collectivity of labor in addition to ownership of shares. And people would go and they would work in the store. And I remember my home co-op, even in the 80s and 90s, would do this. And that has stopped, both at my home co-op growing up in Iowa and at all the other co-ops that do this, has largely, if not entirely, stopped. And the reason is because federal law makes it pretty clear that if you're doing the type of work that should be done by a paid employee, you can't do that as a volunteer. It breaks all the minimum wage laws. It's a real problem. There are some minor exceptions for unpaid internships that are educational, but even those, courts all across the country have started to say, as I'm sure many of you have seen in the news, that unpaid internships are no-go if they are doing things that would normally be paid. If they're educational, that's fine. But if they're stocking shelves and someone would say, wait a minute, stocking shelves is something normally done by a wage laborer, you can't do that. So that's a very big possibility in terms of our current situation. And I want to pivot to that. Our current situation, labor is very important. You know, building up board capacity, building up volunteer capacity, running, if we decide to do various things, pop-up markets or farmers markets or drop-offs of local food, as I've seen in the chat and have been discussed by the board, that's all totally fine. I want to emphasize that that's all completely fine. Those are community organization functions. Those are not things that would be done by a paid laborer. Once we open, both because of the legal reasons and because of the ethical reasons that Dana has discussed and our desire to create jobs, doing that sort of thing is really not on the table right now. And it's not just not on the table for us because we're being picky. It's not on the table for co-ops nationally, pretty much at this point.
Thank you, Anthony. I did notice a comment from Matt Nix coming in too about the local co-op giving it discounts to owner members, but then there was like higher prices for non-members. And would that be one way that we could get people to buy in as owners? We certainly discussed that one of the benefits of ownership is being able to have owner-only sales and different things like that. But we also have to balance the owner pricing versus rest of the people pricing, with the idea that we have a lot of community members that are living paycheck to paycheck. And while we want to have organic foods and beautiful local foods, sometimes those come at a higher price already. So having to kind of do a bit of a balance with that is something that we were also looking at when we were discussing kind of the layout of the store and center store and grab and go and meet and all of these different program options. We were trying to look at what are ways that we can make sure we also have affordable food for people. And obviously becoming an owner, and if we have this low price membership, that might be an option to still be able to get an even better deal on your pricing. But many co-ops out there do discounts and do owner only sales periodically or certain pricing on certain items. I don't know that we've seen specifically a co-op across the board have owners pay this price and everybody else pay that price every day all the time, but they certainly do offer discounts so that there's some sort of a financial benefit to being an owner as well. So I know we've seen that and we've talked about that, but typically we haven't had a whole lot problems getting owners. We have 1,845 owners, unless we got somebody new, Grant, since our board meeting last week. But, 86, we've gotten one more. Yeah, 86, 1846. So we really haven't had trouble getting people to join Chicago Market. We have more owners for the stage that we're in, not having started construction, than some co-ops have open and operating. So and that's one of the things a lot of the consultants that we've talked to have said has been really awesome. It's like, you have so many owners, but yet we have 27 participants on this call. So it's probably 2% of our ownership on this call participating in this way. Now, when we expand out to volunteers that we know are not here on this call right now, but do participate, we still get up to probably about anywhere between, I'd say, 70 people to maybe up to 100 that are actively involved in some way doing something, but that's still out of 1,800. So engagement by owners and getting people to connect with the co-op and want to do the work of the co-op is definitely one of the things that we're trying to address. So we'll certainly take ideas and suggestions on that. And Jill, I saw you had an idea of doing sessions, doing get to know your farmer interviews. And I've actually gotten to listen to a couple of get to know farmer things on Facebook and things that I know our marketing team has put up on our social media channels. Look what this local farm is doing, or look what that local farm is doing. And it's something that we've actually talked about, not just that, but also our business owners, because we've got a lot of owners that are business owners in the community. And having them do kind of different video features and things of that sort as well. So we're definitely looking at ways to kind of reconnect out there with all kinds of folks. I'm seeing some new messages come in, so
I have a question if
let's
that's
see.
possible.
Anything else? Oh, yeah, Zach.
Zach here, a question. I'm always taken up or aback by the enthusiasm that everybody has, and it comes across in all your comments and presentations, and it's just great to be connected again with you all, seeing as we haven't been together in the same room. So it's just a pleasure to hear all this enthusiasm on your behalves and the hard work that you're still all doing. However, I do have a question on something that came across, at least to me, as I listened to the consultants who brought us to that point of sort of saying, we fell in love with this building and the whole idea of being in this neighborhood. And that's what I totally bought into, not only because I live in the neighborhood, but the building itself. If these consultants convinced you back in January through the studies and so on, that this was not a viable building, and you were prepared to go to the city as you did and pull out, and therefore you were prepared to meet the what sounded like a fairly awesome number that it was going to cost to pull out. Can you just put into some kind of context as to what the consultants particularly might have said in the last 2 or 3 months, or whatever that period is since you met with the city, and they've given you all this flexibility and freedom, 18 months, 2 years, whatever it might be, to make this work? What is their perspective? And I'll put it in my terms, and you can tell me whether it's right or wrong or whatever. So they were 100% telling you to pull out. Then the city did what they said. Did they sort of say, well, you've now sort of opened up a window where there's maybe a 30% possibility that you could make this building work with all its shortfalls that they have obviously pointed out to us? So that's kind of the question. I won't take up any more time than that, which is, where does it fall? Because I'm listening to it, I'm hearing all the usual energy and efforts that are going into making the next steps sort of fall into the next steps that make the money come in, make the things fall into place. But if the consultants in particular, and there may be other specialists out there, if they're still saying you're sort of pushing the stone up a hill, and it's only like a 30% possibility, I guess the ultimate question is, why are we not also dual tracking, looking for a second building? Because 6 months from now, we might be right back to pulling out. So the question really is, what is their professional opinion about what we're doing in sticking with it? And, the city seems to have us on the hook, and they've wound us back in again when we were in fact prepared to walk away. So
yeah, did we just bite on that hook again, right?
well, I understand that. So
yeah,
that's why
no,
it's a
I
tough
think
question.
I think you've worded it really, really well, Zach. So thank you very much for voicing that. And I think it's something that we've all thought of as well, and we've also missed you as well. But I'm going to toss it over to Grant because I think it has to do with a few different things. And one of them that I'm sure we'll probably touch on is we were planning to build the store as designed, and we've kind of set aside that design at this point. So
well, I understood that. Yeah.
Add anything more to that?
Sure, right. So here's the thing. We, having heard some movement from the CTA, we turned back to those very same consultants and we said point blank, look, the CTA is showing their cards in this way. Can you imagine a store that can work in this space? They know it's a difficult space. We just said point blank, you don't have to tell us right now what that looks like because they need time and they need to develop it with us.
Right.
But is there a point in moving forward and in pursuing that? And they said yes. And so for us, that means that we have to take the next step with those consultants and say, okay, great. Help us understand what we were pursuing wrong before. Make suggestions to us instead of a little bit the other way around where we were saying we want the Cadillac. Now instead say, look, you know what this space looks like. You know how it could perform as a grocery store, but probably a different one than we imagined. What is that? And then we're going to bring that back to owners and say, okay, look, we have to cut this, this, and this, but this will still be really cool. And we can still maintain these programs. So I don't know the answer to your question of what the changes will be yet because we haven't had a chance to engage them. We're working on that right now. But we do know that they clearly said it's possible. And so there was enough for us to move forward with. We just don't know the nuts and bolts yet.
And it's worth noting, I want to emphasize something Grant said, which is we're asking different questions now than we were before. You know, what we were doing with our consultants before was we gave them a list of things we wanted, and we said, given these things we wanted, price and design a store. We did not say to them, given the store and the budget, price and design a store. And those are very different questions. And that's something we've really been working on a lot over the last, frankly, even before the CTA conversation over the last 6 months, is trying to go at it a little bit, and frankly, in a slightly more business-like way, going at it backwards and saying, here's the space we have if we stay in the space, here's the amount of money we're willing to spend if the financial projections hold up and the market studies and everything like that hold up. What can we do versus everything we want to do and here's how much it costs, and then, oh goodness, we freak out because the cost is too high. That's, once again, not to say that you're wrong. It's not to say that we are there. It's to say that we are taking a little bit of a different approach with our consultants. And I think that's really important too. And that's why the only reason I say that is to push back at the idea that the consultant said a 100% no. We got new info from the CTA and now suddenly they're maybe saying yes. It's actually that we kind of radically changed our approach to asking them the question. That still might not get us there, but that's the transparent version of what we've been doing.
The other piece of that, a little bit of color around those discussions, the feasibility discussion included somebody from the development co-op that is part of the NCG, the National Co-op Grocers, whose purpose in life is to get co-ops open from a dead zero start to build them out and make them work. And having had him and another person from NCG and people from Colluminate look at all of where we were and the costs and everything that led them to come back and report that they didn't think the store was feasible. In the course of the post-report discussion with the board, we flat out asked Dave the question you basically just asked of, okay, is this worth looking at feasibility if we tweak the question and look at this from a different standpoint? Because we had the same, right? We had gotten to the point by the end of the discussion of the report of going, okay, we get it. This is not going to work as it exists. And so we flat out asked Dave, you know, if you're interested in doing feasibility analysis of this, does this mean you think there's a feasible store in that location? And he said yes.
Right.
We only have like less than a minute left. And I did want to just kind of comment on a couple of the final like chat comments that have come in, asking about priorities, and Lee sort of answered that already, saying the three things. Can we operationally make it feasible? Can we organizationally get the support we need, that everybody in the co-op is rowing in the same direction and helping us make this project happen? And funding. And I have to say, if as a board we had to pick one of those three, money's going to have to come out on top, because if we don't get the money we need to build whatever we design that's buildable, or even with all the engagement that we might get, it's not going to happen. We have to be able to fund it, and being not supported by giant mass investors that will give a conventional grocery store a whole bunch of money to build a new store. We have to do it ourselves. So that is one of the biggest challenges that we're facing. And Matt also had commented on Oshkosh Co-op saying, what do they do to end up with all of that money in donations? We've met with them separately. We've actually had been on some of those co-video series calls with them, and got a lot of great information, a lot of great notes. We're looking at this point to try and get help doing some of the things that they have done, which is outreach, reaching out to all the people in their community, reaching out to organizations that might be interested in doing donations, being connected with high net worth individuals that wouldn't mind plopping a whole bunch of money down on something local and community focused. So looking for people that you know who know somebody to get us connected, having bandwidth of members that can help us do that work and do that outreach and that sort of thing. So hopefully that kind of answers some of those questions, or at least comments on some of the comments. And Jill, I also wanted to say thank you for for your comment about us being in a historic building and trying to do what we're trying to do. It's challenging on a lot of fronts. Most people are used to those big investors kind of coming in and funding things, and this is just, it's a homegrown thing. It's all of us individual, one person by one person, one owner by one owner, up to 1,846 of us doing this. So so it's interesting. But thank you so much for your participation. This conversation does not end here. Please, please don't let it end here. We will follow up with some of the people that may have commented in the chat with ideas or suggestions. We're hoping if it was your idea that you might help us make it come to fruition, or encourage others to get behind your idea and help you get it to fruition. We would love to have people join us at board meetings. Owners are always welcome at our board meetings, and they're typically the last Wednesday of the month, or the fourth Wednesday of the month. We usually put them up on our website, so you can find them there. And there's an opportunity to reach out at board@chicagomarket.coop, that website that we had listed in the chat earlier, to let us know what other ideas you have, how else you want to lean in. We mentioned Kate's on the call. She's our volunteer coordinator. If you want to get in touch with her, let us know. We'll connect you so that she can find the right place for you to help us make this happen. It was really, really hard as a board to get to the decision that we did, that Grant first spoke about when he first started and kicked us off at this meeting, to say, it's not going to work here. We believe in this project. We believe that a locally owned, community owned and run grocery store can work in Chicago. We know it can. The Dill Pickle is doing it. We have a lot of examples in other places. We just need to make ours work, and we need to find a way to make it happen. And so you're our owners, you're along with us, you're along on this roller coaster of a ride that we're on with everything that's going on in the world right now. Community is even becoming more and more important, and we know that and we feel that ourselves. And as a board, we've also done a lot to change the way we work together. We might be small, but we're mighty right now, and we would love to have owners join us and run for the board as well. So all those plugs, funding, join us as a volunteer, join the board. Hopefully I hit all of them that we really wanted to make sure we got across to you guys today. But thank you for your engagement, for your willingness to take some time out tonight with us and chat, and please stay in touch. Anything else, guys?
Thank you very much.
All righty. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.